Two lovers, two souls bound together. To outsiders, they were just ordinary couples. A farmer and his wife, a teenage romance, a Depression-era pair of dreamers. But behind closed doors, these partnerships transformed into something far darker. Because when two people feed each other's obsessions, love doesn't always heal. Sometimes, it kills. They were inseparable, two lovers bound not just by passion, but by a secret hunger for chaos. Friends described them as magnetic, intoxicating, and completely unstoppable when they were together. But what began as romance soon spiraled into a string of crimes so twisted, it would leave a trail of bodies, broken families, and unanswered questions. This isn't just about crime. This is about the thin line between passion and death. Every dangerous duo begins with something familiar. Attraction, connection, love. They laugh, they share secrets, they build a world together. But in rare, terrifying cases, that world becomes sealed off, a cocoon where right and wrong are rewritten. In criminology, there's a term for it. Folie à deux, or madness shared by two. One partner lights the spark, the other fans the flames, and together they create a storm that neither could summon alone. Our first story takes us to the rural heartland of Missouri, to a farm that looked no different from hundreds of others. But buried beneath the soil of Ray and Fay Copeland's property were secrets darker than the fertile ground itself. It was the late 1980s in Mooresville, Missouri. Population barely 100. A quiet farming town where everyone waved to each other on the street, where gossip spread fast but real crime was rare. And in that stillness lived Ray and Fay Copeland. To neighbors they were ordinary, harsh maybe but harmless. An elderly couple in their 70s who still tended the land. But what no one knew was that their farm had become a graveyard. Ray was born in 1914, a child of the Great Depression. Those years carved him into a hard man. He grew up poor, distrustful, quick to anger. His criminal record stretched back decades. Theft, fraud, swindling. But he always slipped through the cracks. Fay, on the other hand, seemed the opposite. Born in 1921, she was known as a dutiful wife, a woman who cooked, cleaned, and raised 5 children while Ray's temper ruled the household. To neighbors, she looked like every other grandmother in town. Apron on, glasses perched, a kind smile. No one suspected the darkness she'd eventually share with Ray. But sometimes appearances aren't just deceiving. They're deadly. Throughout the 1980s, drifters, men desperate for work, arrived at the Copeland farm. Ray promised them wages in exchange for hard labor. They came, they worked, and then they vanished. Families assumed the men moved on. Police figured they were transients, but in reality they were buried. 5 bodies were eventually discovered, each shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber rifle. Cold execution-style killing. And all wore second-hand clothing linked to the Copeland household. At first, investigators were baffled. Why would an elderly couple kill? Then came the discovery that changed everything. A notebook, handwritten in Fay's tidy script. A ledger of names, the workers who'd passed through the farm. Next to some of the names was a dark mark. Crossed out. Erased. The question loomed. Was Fay just an abused wife? Or was she writing the script of murder herself? Neighbors were horrified. Reporters swarmed the tiny town, dubbing them America's oldest serial killer couple. Forensic psychologists argued over the truth. Was Fay a terrified victim of Ray's abuse? Or did the power of their partnership give her a taste of control she'd never had before? The courtroom became a theater of shock as jurors looked at a kindly grandmother accused of orchestrating death. Ray and Fay were just the beginning. Because decades earlier, another couple, much younger, much more reckless, had painted the Midwest in blood. Their story would make national headlines, terrify families, and inspire films for decades to come. Nebraska, 1958. America was changing. Rock and roll blared from radios. Teenagers pushed against old rules, and the country stood on the edge of cultural rebellion. But in Lincoln, Nebraska, rebellion took a deadly form. His name was Charles Starkweather. He was 19. She was Carol and Fugate, only 14. Together, they would unleash a spree of violence so shocking, it would leave the Midwest trembling. Charles was a high school dropout, often bullied for his fiery red hair and speech impediment. He idolized James Dean, wore a leather jacket, and saw himself as an outlaw in a world that didn't understand him. Carol was barely a teenager, impressionable, uncertain, drawn to Charles's intensity. He promised her escape from boredom, from small-town life. What she didn't know was that escape would come drenched in blood. In January 1958, Charles snapped. After a fight with Carol's family, he murdered them, her mother, stepfather and baby sister, in cold blood. He then told Carol they had to run. What followed was an 8-day rampage across Nebraska and Wyoming. 11 people would die. Farmers, teenagers, even a wealthy couple and their maid. Some were shot. Others were stabbed. All left behind in ditches, cars and homes, while panic spread through every town they passed. The manhunt was massive. Newspapers screamed of teenage killers on the loose. Parents barred their children from leaving home. Gas stations closed early, fearing they'd be the next target. For the first time, America was faced with the image of kids, teenagers, as ruthless murderers. Eventually, Charles and Carol were cornered. Police chased them down a Wyoming highway, bullets flying. Charles surrendered. Carol was taken in handcuffs, screaming she was innocent. And then began the psychological war. Was Carol his victim? Or his partner? Charles claimed she egged him on. She claimed he held her hostage. The jury didn't believe her. Charles was executed in the electric chair. Carol served 17 years before parole. To this day, her role remains one of true crime's most haunting mysteries. A teenage girl, accomplice, or hostage. No one can say for certain. But Charles and Carol weren't the first to capture the world's imagination. Long before them, another couple blazed across America, robbing banks, killing officers, and becoming immortalized as folk heroes. Their names: Bonnie and Clyde. The 1930s were a time of desperation. Banks were foreclosing homes, families starved, and many Americans saw authority not as protector but as oppressor. Against this backdrop, two young lovers rose up, not as saviors but as outlaws. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. Their love story was one of poetry, gunfire, and blood. Clyde was a small-time thief, in and out of prison before his 21st birthday. Bonnie was a waitress with big dreams, known for her charm and love of writing. When they met, sparks flew instantly. Bonnie wrote poems about their love, while Clyde plotted robberies. Soon they weren't just Bonnie and Clyde. They were a gang. Over 2 years they robbed banks, gas stations and stores. But what cemented their notoriety was the violence. Police officers gunned down, bystanders caught in the crossfire. Yet somehow, photos of Bonnie with a cigar and pistol, smiling, mischievous, transformed them into folk icons. To some, they were rebels against a broken system. To others, they were cold-blooded killers. By 1934, law enforcement had had enough. After months of pursuit, 6 officers set an ambush on a lonely Louisiana road. Bonnie and Clyde drove into the trap. Over 100 bullets tore through their Ford the 5.8. The outlaw lovers died side by side, their reign ending in a storm of gunfire. Crowds swarmed their bodies, desperate for a piece of history. Why do we remember Bonnie and Clyde differently than the Copelands or Starkweather and Fugate? Perhaps because the Great Depression needed folk heroes, outlaws who symbolized rebellion against banks and authority. But strip away the myth, and you're left with a chilling truth. Passion doesn't excuse blood. Ray and Fay Copeland. Charles Starkweather and Carol Fugate. Bonnie and Clyde. 3 duos, 3 eras, same deadly pattern. Love, obsession, complicity. Alone, each individual may have been powerless. But together they became killers. For investigators, these cases revealed the strange psychology of co-offending. How one partner manipulates, the other follows. How passion blinds, enabling unspeakable acts. And how communities, desperate to understand, create myths that sometimes overshadow the victims themselves. These duos leave us with unsettling questions. Could we ever imagine our partner pulling us into darkness? Could love make us ignore morality? For the victims' families, the answer is painfully clear. Lives were destroyed, futures erased. But for society, their stories remain legends, warnings about the power of passion turned toxic. And maybe the scariest part isn't the guns, the plots, or the graves. It's that these couples look just like anyone else. A farmer and his wife. Two teenagers in love. A waitress and a boy with dreams. Proof that sometimes, the most dangerous duos aren't hiding in the shadows. They're sitting right across the dinner table. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends so they can enjoy it too.